famed writer for Disinfo, experimental musician, psychedelic shaman, and we have a lot to talk about with music specifically today. So thank you for doing this. It's a pleasure to interview you.
Thanks for asking. Definitely.
So your musical project is called Chapel Supremesus. Am I correct about that?
That is correct. That is the current thing that I'm working on, and it's a project with me and my friend Dean Swanson, who used to be in a band called Hidden Number. It started off as kind of a more, certain projects have a certain intent behind it, which is maybe a more magical way of looking at things. And that project started off, and we really wanted to, the whole point of the project ended up that we were trying to induce magical or higher states of consciousness. That was kind of the intent behind what we're doing. And what we didn't realize is that it kind of evolved into almost more of a film project rather than just solely a music project. And so it just became this whole thing. So we now are like kind of making occult films because traditionally occult films by Kenneth Anger, and he's kind of the biggest name. But we went to like this festival like a block away from Dean's place in Capitol Hill, and it was like this occult film compendium, and it had some people like Ira Cohen, who I like a lot, and Marjorie Cameron. It was the first time I'd seen her Wormwood Star. So the idea of occult movies are really long music videos, and so weirdly enough, after we'd started working on this project, and it kind of came together that the project that I was in kind of got put on indefinite hiatus, and same deal with him. So we started kind of working. He recorded a couple albums for a band that I was in called Black Science. So we started doing this. We went to this thing about occult films, and then less than a year later, we ended up actually making an entire occult film. You can watch most of it on DMI TV on YouTube, and you can probably put a link in there. And it's divided into two pieces, but we've actually since combined it into one 38-minute super trippy film that's designed to fuck with your head. So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on right now.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it would make sense anyways. Most esoteric ritual shamanic practices, I mean, they're usually they're very sensual. They're layered in different senses to kind of, envelop the person into a altered state, I guess you could say. So yeah, it would be very logical that you would move on to other mediums as well, or medias as well.
Yeah, so, I think music is really the first thing that I started doing. I mean, way before I ever started playing around with like psychedelic drugs or chaos magic, or I guess maybe I'd been playing around with astral projection before that, but it was really just the process of making music that really was really weird, honestly. And I've experimented with a lot of other, I think there's something to music that isn't in like a more of a pop format, and sometimes doesn't have vocals, that kind of takes you out of the linguistic programming, because pop hooks and whatnot are going to kind of wrap you up into a more linguistic way of thinking about things. So Chapel Supremesus, it's trying a long, more drawn out format, but exactly what you're saying is, there's a lot of bands that make long, trippy psychedelic music. We were on purpose trying to do it to induce magical states of consciousness. So that's one difference in what we're doing for sure.
Right. So, to paraphrase, essentially, a stance of yours is that the psychedelic experience has the potential to supersede religion and render it obsolete.
Yes.
So is your music one of those said psychedelic experiences, and would you think it would have the potential to, in fact, render religion useless?
I render it useless might be a hard-ass way of saying that, and I use those kind of terms to talk shit, because let's face it, shamanic cultures have been beaten into a corner, in our society. I mean, psychedelic drugs are technically illegal, and weed being legalized is a pretty big thing that I don't think enough people are talking about in like kind of a civil rights context. It's the first step in a wall of our culture has restricted the uses of psychedelic drugs. It's been a big thing. So, but it's definitely the potential to destroy religion. I think there's some basic scientific truths. Like psychedelic drugs haven't been studied. So when you're talking about it, you can argue against the potentiality if you want, but you have to at least conclude that we've never actually studied that. It's just starting to happen. And the preliminary research that we're showing is, one of the first studies into psilocybin, and this is what I experienced as a young man, is they took people that were raised in a more Christian context and they gave them the psychedelic drugs, and all of them reported having a very profound spiritual experience, some like one of the most profound spiritual experiences that they've had in their life. And so this is an entire area of science that involves the potentiality of the human imagination in my mind, and it's more, we forget how this culture of thousands of years of, not necessarily thousands of years now, but, a good years of, we committed genocide against shamanic cultures, and we behave as if these religions have nothing to say, or these spiritual practices, we behave as if it's crazy. And yet simultaneously, we're so superstitious and we're so set in that belief that we've never actually studied this stuff. And so I definitely think that if psychedelic drugs were legal, then people like me, per se, like right now, I can't just go out and start a mushroom church. I can't just go start a religion. I can in Seattle, where I live. I can't start a pot church, and this is something that I want to work on, because I use pot meditation pretty heavily in my practice. But I still couldn't go out and start a psilocybin-based religion or an LSD-based religion or even ayahuasca. There's been some legal things. So I mean, not destroy, but I think really destroy the way we view spirituality in general. And the more that we think about this in a more scientific manner, the more that our religious beliefs would go away. But I would also say one of the funniest things that I found is I think they would evolve to more a Gnostic sect, because I do think there are some spiritual truths in religion that are just kind of inherent, the concept of lower realms and higher realms and demonic versus angelic forms of intelligence, stuff like that. I think there's some underlying, good concepts in that. But yeah, I definitely think psychedelics, if they were legalized, would transform religion, and I think that would happen really quickly. And I think what you see is in the 60s, when that was starting to happen, the war machine, kind of came in and shut that down. And it's important to note that that was also largely due to the irresponsibility of the hippie movement. They were incredibly naive in what they were doing simultaneously, so that's important to note. But it is also important that they were opposing the war machine, and the war machine shut them down, and now we have the biggest war apparatus in history. So I think it's more important than ever in this day and age to start asking these questions about psychedelics and these religions that we have that keep being used as a pretext to propagate war in this day and age. And I think psychedelics are the best shot we have at this point, and I would say just a lot of other meditation techniques and whatnot. But really just more thinking about this in a more scientific term, rather than just saying that stuff's not real and we're afraid of it, so let's not pay any attention to it.
Right, which would bring people closer to an unbiased perception. So yeah, I believe that would in fact, for good or worse, would directly affect society in a good way. Being able to study these things scientifically without a hint of moralism in it at all, and just studying it for exactly what it is, which is chemistry and chemicals, and how they relate to our states of consciousness, and how those things are expressed in organically in our brain. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And we live in a particularly schizophrenic state. I mean, as a musician, one of the things that I ran into, I finally actually just quit drinking. I've cleaned up my drinking heavily, but in music, it's one thing that's always disappointed me slightly is that you really are there to sell booze. That's where the majority of money in the music industry is. If you're a bigger band, but when you're going out to clubs and you're getting invited, right?
You shield for booze. Yeah, you really do.
Yeah. And I've always been disappointed in that. And, I tried to really go with the flow for years, and I drank heavily, and it really just sort of backfired on me. And now I drank so much that, I'm going to turn 38 next month, and my body really essentially can't handle alcohol anymore, which is why I had to quit. And so, weed's a big thing, and it'd be nice that if, even on that level, and then we're not talking about the pharmaceutical industry, but just because we have one legal recreational drug, we have this entire culture, and music is unfortunately way too tied to this culture of hawking drinks, which is sort of disappointing. Not that drinking isn't fun. I had a lot of fun drinking, but I think music has a lot more potentiality than just hawking booze. And I think when you look at the type of music that succeeded, it's been very booze-centric music. People when they're drunk want to hear songs that they can sing along with. Essentially, people when they're high or tripping want to hear a lot different.
I think it's intoxication that most Western societies' brains have been used to for so long, for most modern Western civilization. I think that's why that's the legal high. And I think that's why there's so much of a superstition towards other chemicals, mind-altering agents. I have to say, mushrooms changed my life as a young person, actually.
I'm in the same boat, yeah.
It just literally, I guess it gave me new senses when I took it, at least. I took it when I was about 19 the first time. And I wasn't 19 years old anymore when it happened.
My behavior changed completely, yeah, because I had such a strong experience to psychedelic mushrooms that I went from a guy who had, just given up Christianity like a few years earlier, and I wasn't really, I guess I was kind of spiritual, but I didn't really think about it, and all of a sudden I was doing nothing but reading books about shamanism and out-of-body experiences and UFOs, weirdly enough, and so I had I went from somebody that had no interest in that stuff to somebody that's like, all I'm doing is reading about this weird stuff to try and explain what the hell happened to me. And another thing that's weird is, after the first time I took mushrooms, I had this weird bilocation incident. And it's even hard to conceptualize in my mind to this day, but I was above my body, and I was a college student at this time, and I saw myself doing things like going to the dining hall, and yet I was somehow floating above my body and looking down on my body, and I was inside it and acting like nothing was happening, and yet it didn't feel weird. And that happened a few times the next week after I did mushrooms, and yeah, it would so this would happen, and then it would come back, and I didn't feel it. Didn't That's the weirdest part, is it would just happen, and I didn't even notice. I would just go through my life, and then this changed, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, now, and even thinking and talking about it to this day, there's I know this happened, it's in my memory, and yet it's still weird. It's how is that possible? So yeah, just mushrooms, and that's never happened again. I've never done mushrooms and had that weird bilocation thing happen, but of course it ties into a lot of things that have been shown later in various altered states of consciousness as I started pursuing things like chaos magic and whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating what data they do have specifically of psilocybin is that neurologically it blends the different divided neural connections in the brains, and it kind of just throws them in this big soup, so where they kind of experience each other for the first time, really. They all kind of mingle, and they're strange bedfellows. Their senses and smells or taste and smells put together. It's the classic acid expression. Of it. That color tastes salty, or
yeah,
like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually, that was a recent thing that came out just not too long ago, where there was some brain scan that was done with psilocybin, and it showed that it's actually turning off certain subsets of the brain rather than what we would think. You think it's activating consciousness, and actually what it's doing is turning off things. And I think if you're going by the more receiver model of consciousness, that the mind is like a receiver, like a television or the internet or whatever, I think that makes a lot of sense, that you're shutting down kind of the filters that you use to navigate through your waking reality, and some of that's getting turned off, and that your brain is so focused on what people would call consensus reality, and what needs to get you up and get you your job, and help take care of your kids or get you through your day, that there's so much of that, and you've programmed your brain to do that, and then mushrooms just kind of go and be like, let me pull some of that away and see what happens now. And it's all this crazy shit. I think it's very fascinating to think about it that way, because it is kids are born and we slowly beat these patterns of reality into your head. And
right.
And that's, you forget that you've created this process that's creating reality. And so it's fascinating to think when you strip some of that away, you're in this completely different, how many years did it take to get you to that point where you're just tuning all this in? And then that's why psilocybin is potentially, who knows, this has to be studied more, but potentially what it's doing is just shutting some of that off, which is really fascinating to me.
It is fascinating. It's very fascinating. So you use cannabis specifically for meditative purposes.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So my question is kind of music centric, but it's are there chemicals that inspire you to make electronic music, and are there ones that inspire you to make more analog music?
I would say I think my practice is a lot to do with building a relationship with things like weed and mushrooms. I think that with weed, I think a lot of my shamanic practice is kind of building a relationship with that. I think trippy music is trippy music. It's weird. I grew up in the 90s when, a lot of course, the popular stuff that was going on was, like the grunge stuff and whatnot. But and kind of the anger heroin music, but there was still like, you know, stoner metal was starting out then, you know, a lot of bands like Caius and Monster Magnet, and then a lot of shoegaze stuff from the UK, and then a weird electronic music. So, I mean, that's like the stuff that I was listening to when I first started getting high when I was like 18. So I think that's, you know, it all, of course I listen to more music now, and I actually like music more now than I did, but I think the stuff you start listening to definitely makes an imprint, you know, when you're, you know, a young person, especially when I first started smoking weed and listening to music. And so, no, I don't think there's really, I make analog music, more analog music and more, electronic music, and I think it both interacts well with mushrooms. But I will say, the music that I make that's more analog music, it's like, yes, I'm playing guitar, but I'm normally running my guitar through like a bunch of effects pedals and loop pedals, and then there's weird keyboard effects. So most of the supposedly analog music I've made, I'm not really one of those musicians that's, you know, made a lot of like acoustic guitar songs or anything. Most of the analog music I have is really, you know, almost an extension. I started playing around with samplers, and my guitar playing style, I think, is largely my sampler. My loop pedal is my favorite pedal, and that's what I use the most. So yeah, I mean, even when I'm using analog music. Anyways, I think there's a similar process of what I do. It's kind of maximize. It's kind of hyper maximalism sometimes, where the idea is that it's one way of altering states of consciousness when you're throwing kind of more perceptual stimuli at the listener than their brains can actually process. Then in a state, you know, in an altered state, that kind of actually your brain's inability to necessarily handle all of what's going on actually causes a pretty significant effect that distorts consciousness. So, I mean, that's just one way of creating and distorting consciousness through music that I've experimented with. I think minimalism, in like trance minimalism, works just as well. There's a couple different ways, but that's always kind of more the route I am. So, yeah, when I'm doing analog music, you know, there's probably like samples going on and you know, two guitar loops. It all comes from the same place. I mean, it's really, I guess really everything I do is electronic music in a way. I'm not really a straightforward, you know, guitar through no effects pedals type of dude.
I think it's fair to say that a over-processed electric guitar is essentially a modular synth. Really, it's just like a lo-fi modular synth with metallic strings that you vibrate instead of hitting, you know, keys. Really, I do. I mean, you're plugging a bunch of stuff in, you're plugging a bunch of stuff out, you're changing the connections, the flow of each effect changes subtly. The way you stack it, like kind of like an algorithm. So yeah, I would definitely think that's a fair assessment, really. So you released your recording the day I achieved contact.
Yeah.
Under Dark Minds International, DMI.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what kind of relationship you have with them? I don't know if they're one of those just hands-off internet labels, or do they really work with you, or what?
What's funny about that is, yeah, it's my label. I do everything. And actually, Thad McKraken that name actually came from me years ago in my first band. We didn't have a label that wanted to put out our stuff, so we were like, what if we pretend like we're a label and we make it seem like our stuff is coming from other people, which seemingly were to a certain extent. And so that's actually where the name Thad McKraken came from. That's when I came up with it, like 10 years before I started using it as a writer. So yeah, the relationship with the label is it's my label. I wish other people would put out my stuff. I've done a decent amount of job promoting it, but you know, it's like there's only so much you can do. I don't, you know, I'm actually decent at PR and whatnot, but like it's, you know, it's not like I've ever been in I'd love to be in a real label. I know. The good part about being on your own label is that there's no one telling you what to do, and you can do what, you know, it's like I can put out whatever I want to put out. But simultaneously, I mean, I don't claim to be an expert in PR or whatnot, or have, you know, the type of connections or bankroll that a real label would have. Although, you know, I think my next projects I'll have more of a budget than, but yeah, no, just like my books, I would happily put stuff out on another label if anyone wanted to help me out with that. Yeah, so it's sort of, and if you look at my DMI, like the music, it's like it's all stuff that I think I put out like one thing that was a bass with my friend's bassist, like ambient project that he made. And so yeah, like there's been like one thing on DMI that I somehow wasn't doing. So that is just, I didn't have a label, so I'm going to put it out. So I'm just going to declare myself a label, put it out like so many other people.
But so I guess it's fair to say that you have a very intimate relationship with DMI, and it is very intimate. Right?
Yeah. I weirdly know what God. It's weird. DMI that started like more than 10 years ago with my first band, the Nemesis Theory. And as I said, when we put out our second album, we tried to shop at labels, no one was interested. So we tried to make it seem like it was coming from someone outside of us. And it started off as Dark Matter International, and then there was like, or Dark Matter Industries, and then there was like instant, like I took that name, and then there was like 10 other people that had it like within like the year, even like legitimate businesses. So and so I changed it to Dark Mind. I could go into the concept of Dark Mind anyways. It has to do with, it's like dark matter, but the hidden stuff that's influencing psychology. And then I noticed that I was getting way more hits outside of America than I ever did in America. So yeah, and I still have gotten way more traffic with my music outside of America than in America. So I changed it to Dark Matter International, especially with the internet and that. So yeah, so it's DMI now, and it's supposed to be a parody of a corporation too, because I've worked for shitty corporations, unfortunately. So there's like a kind of like, there's like a corporate parody in what I'm doing that maybe you'd have to read some of the press releases. I wrote some pretty preposterous stuff for press releases for bands, which again probably got me way more press than I ever should have gotten.
DMI can sound like a corporation. That sounds like a public.
Yeah, there are a bunch of corporations called DMI. Yeah, that's the point. It's supposed to just sound like some dumb corporation. That's here at DMI.
So I'm going to say this in my in the best Robert Anton Wilson E prime I can. And I'm going to say that because I believe it's fitting for the subject matter. So you suspect that you have come into contact with extraterrestrials that are sentient outside of time. Do you suspect if they have any kind of relationship with music at all or sound of any kind?
That is a very fascinating question. And yes, and when I say I have contact with extra-dimensional entities outside of time, what these extra-dimensional forms of intelligence have essentially communicated to me in no uncertain terms is that they are me. So we have this tendency to put them external, and I would never. I say extra-dimensional for a reason, not extraterrestrial. But there is a long tradition of, well, not a long tradition, but Robert Anton Wilson actually wrote about in the book Cosmic Trigger about how he started experimenting with a hash-based sex tantra, and he had this experience where this entity showed up and taught him about the nature of time. He was trying to replicate the work of Aleister Crowley and other occultists of the time who have reported the same thing. Grant Morrison tried to do the same thing and had the same type of experience, and now you have me who's done the same type of thing and had the same sort of experience. So there is this underlying theory there that you can do hash-based sex magic, which is really just a lot of visualization exercises while you're stoned in a sexual state, often when you're not. And this idea that you can make a connection to things outside of time. And you can read my book if you want. I'm not going to go full details. I could talk about this stuff forever and how it is. I will say, whether they're made of sound, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think the world is created in a means of sound. And I had this really weird lucid dream experience. So for a while, first of all, just a little bit of background. Hermeticism, which is it's an occult tradition, is based on the idea that trying to work to attain godhood. And long before I was even really aware of that or started becoming a practicing occultist, I had lucid dreams where it was like I was lucid and I knew that I was dreaming, and it was like I was in control of an entire world. So we talk about the ascent to godhood. And in these dreams, it was literally like, rather than being just the person, I was controlling the entire realm of my perception. If I wanted to say I want to see a mountain over there, a mountain would appear. So I'd have these type of dreams. At one point in these dreams, though, because it gets limiting, and another point I was kind of shown that it's like looking in a mirror. So I was having dreams like this for a while, and I'd struggle to fly. I'd want to fly, and I'd have a character, and I'd be struggling to, like, I'd start flying a little bit, and then I start falling to the ground. So one of these in particular dreams, I started asking for help, and these, like, almost like in a video game, like you ask for hints. And so, like, these helper entities showed up in my dream, and they showed me that to fly was very similar to singing falsetto in this dream. Now, and so I did it, and I started trying to do this like kind of falsetto singing. And when I did that, I would ascend kind of higher. So yeah, I definitely think that these other realms are kind of more made of music. And I think there's classic fairy tales and lore throughout the centuries of these fairy circles where they're singing and dancing. And I think, but quite possibly thinking in a more musical or linguistic sense would give you the ability in these other realms to ascend heavenward. And and I think humanity and their relationship with music, and it's very profound, and it's something that, you know, I think more scientific minded or rationalist minded people, you know, kind of just skirt around the fact that, you know, why do we go to music festivals, and, you know, why is there something so profound about this experience of, you know, taking weird drugs and having these transcendent experiences that has just only increased in popularity throughout time, as much as conservative society has tried to repress it.
Yeah, you know, specifically for me, I've always been fascinated with West African religion, that type of shamanic thing, the voodoo Santeria, all that, the candomblé, and even like the Mexican brujeria. Like, that stuff always fascinated me. And to me, the more you study it, really you're learning about another culture, but you're really learning about the human condition. I mean, when you really see how these religious practices are done, they're done in ecstasy, and they're done in complete happiness. They're done in complete surrender. And really, you know, even in the West, we attempt to have these types of things throughout music festivals and things like that. I think the human needs them. You know, we definitely need that experience in our life to get through things. God, could you imagine living without it?
I'm like a music nut. Like, I'm one of those people that I listen to music like constantly, you know, and like I said, I mean, I listen to more stuff, newer stuff, and I like newer stuff more than, you know, I ever listened to old stuff. And I play music, and that's, you know, the first creative thing that I've gotten more into visual art and writing as I've gotten older, but music has always been the thing that I wanted to do. And I was just one of those dorks that grew up, and, like, you know, I'll even watch like any, like, behind the music, like anything. It could be a band that I hate, and I'll watch it because it's just like, you know, I'm just like that much of a dork, you know. It's like it's like I just do nothing but like constantly obsessed about bands, and there's just more cool stuff out there than there's ever been in the internet. That's just made that, you know, people more aware.
I'll watch behind the music on Winger or on Rat or something like that. I will. Yeah, definitely. I said I'll definitely watch it behind the music on Winger or Rat.
yes, yeah. I watched Foreigner a couple weeks ago, and not only did I watch it, I saw it was going to be on, and I was like, I've never seen that one, so I actually okay, that's on at 7 o'clock. I'm going to come back and watch this at 7 o'clock. Yeah, no, it was just like a few weeks ago. I'm like, oh, I'd never seen the Foreigner. It was good. It was good. I learned a lot.
Okay, so I have a guitar.
Yeah.
Had a mandolin, but the strings broke right before this interview. So let's do a quick jam session, and then we'll move on to the next question. All right, I'm gonna let
I can't like guarantee I'm in any kind of a key or anything. This thing has been sitting here for a while and untuned, but I can try and jam with you. If do you just want me to start playing something, or
just lay something down?
It's gonna be hard to keep it tuned there because I have no idea what this is tuned to.
We had enough. That's all I like to do. It was just a quick second, a quick musical conversation for a moment. Okay, so go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, yeah.
So what genre of music do you think is most inclined to affect spiritual change in a human being?
I think it would really depend on who you are. You know, I don't think there is one genre. I think if you were a certain type of person, it'd be something, and if you were another type of person, you'd be someone else. I think some people respond to lyrics. I know that other people really don't care about lyrics. I do think, though, that there is something to long, drawn out, you know, music that's intended to kind of uplift, that will work. I think I was talking about this a little bit earlier. I think humans, we've been so programmed by caffeine and alcohol and our work culture to crave, 3-minute pop songs, and because I honestly think that's sort of what appeals to drunk people like to sing along with songs that they know. That's why cover bands are so successful. Very few people talk about that. It's like that's what drunk people like. And it's like if you want to make money playing music, like I've never really made money. I mean, not that I've never gotten paid, but I've always when you're doing the over under, I've always basically lost money. But I've known people that are like my uncle. He's a professional cover musician for years, and that's he ended up being an alcoholic too. But you can get paid to play covers because drunk people want to hear songs that they know and sing along with songs that they know. I definitely think kind of longer passages and more. Definitely things like trance and hypermaximalist stuff combined with weed and hallucinogens can definitely create a kind of more profound state of consciousness. I think that's why you're seeing like electronic music festivals are more about this continuous beat going on and inducing states of static dance. So I definitely think, but I really think that, there you could do, I don't think it's specific to genre. I think you could have a lot of different ways, and I think what you like is going to really be a reflection of who you are. Not everyone likes everything, so yeah, I mean.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough. So Witch House electronic music uses a lot of occult themes and symbols. I'm not going to say that it's usually meaningful, but it does in fact use it, and there are some people, at least in the genre, that thoughtfully use these things. Have you ever experimented with witch house music in any shamanic experience?
Weirdly enough, I think Chapel Supremesus' first video is maybe Dean in that project is maybe more influenced by witch house than me. I like weird electronic music. He's playing some of that when I'm around. I think Demdike Stare, I have a couple albums by them that may be considered kind of more witch house. Personally, I can't say, I haven't really listened to a whole lot of it, so I don't have a lot of commentary on it. I will say, like, I saw something about the Russian witch house scene on Vice the other weekend, and the one thing that I will say, and I don't mind saying this as an occultist, there's kind of this obsession with darkness and this embracing of darkness, which, I find disappointing because it's not true to the material. I mean, the occult, and unfortunately, I think, the popularity of Crowley kind of got into this to a certain extent, but there's a lot of people that's embracing this darkness and thinking witchcraft is evil, and the problem with that is that that's the way the church has slandered this stuff. So when you're saying this is all dark and evil, is it really, or as Robert Anton Wilson, that's why I love talking about Robert Anton Wilson, because that guy did the best job in my mind of looking at the occult and breaking it down like, is the idea that sex and drugs can create wild altered states of consciousness, is that a really weird idea? Is it a demon worshipy idea? It's like, my point is no. And in fact, if you're having sex on acid, it's sort of hard to be like really depressed and so there's a lot of this embracing of darkness and embracing of hard drugs and kind of like, I would call it embracing self-destruction that really doesn't fit the material of trying to make contact with your holy guardian angel. So I definitely do find that disappointing. And yet at the same time, I do think I like the rebellious nature of it. I like, the fact that they are trying to make a statement against religion, that's great. But yeah, I mean, it is weird. I was summoned into practicing the occult, which is a really weird long story that you can actually, I'm sure, find me telling on YouTube. But, I think the more you start trying to embrace darkness, the more off track you're getting. It's a lot about, witchcraft is about trying to make your own reality. So if you're given the reins to make your own reality and you, for some reason, want that reality to be creepy and weird, then you have to look at you and say, what's wrong with me that I don't want, why are you embracing self-destruction? And it's probably, some shit from your childhood, in all honesty. So yeah, I get disappointed with the occult and the way it braces, and I don't, and I think still to this day, most people don't have the balls to play around with it, myself included, because of that. I think people will say, oh, I'm in a witch house can, and I'm dark and evil, but I don't think they really have the nuts or the stones to actually like try this stuff, because it's been so effectively slandered. Like, they don't really want to be an evil person, and they think of that if they get involved with this, that's what's going to happen. So it's, I don't even deny that's what kept me away from it for years. So, it's up to me to kind of make occult music that I don't think, and yet, and the stuff that I do, I mean, I think it enters dark passages, but I always make a point of trying to pull the listener out of that, like a banishing ritual. Weirdly enough, in a lot of the music that I've made, I literally kind of end it with a banishing ritual that's kind of pulling the listener out of whatever kind of weird, dark places that I've taken them to. Yeah. So anyways, yeah. But, again, I'm commenting on the imagery of witchcraft, witch house, and the fact that in any interview I've read, it doesn't seem like these people really know anything about witchcraft. It's just a pose, just like metal bands, like black metal claiming to be occult. It's like, guys, they're not actually occultists. They don't know this stuff. It's so it's like, I think it's up to a real, like someone who actually has been doing this for nearly a decade now to be like, you don't want to be embracing self-destruction, and it's even reflected in ayahuasca shamanism. When you read stories of people that have taken ayahuasca, it's all about working through this darkness. And this demonic force is a teacher that's trying to teach you things, this idea of embracing it. And that's the problem. You're embracing the things that you need to be working through. You're wearing them like as a badge of honor. And, don't be surprised when you embrace that self-destructive impulse if you end up self-destructing, And, I think you've seen that with a lot of people that tried to, say, follow Aleister Crowley's path, like, Kenneth Anger and Jimmy Page. And, it's like when you go into that, and Crowley himself, Crowley was a fuck up, and everything that he did blew up on himself because he was a weirdo who wanted to be evil. He wanted to be an evil bad guy. And it's just juvenile and stupid, really. It has nothing to do with making contact with your holy guardian angel, which is supposedly the point, involves getting over that darkness and learning how to use that darkness to your advantage and learning from it and transcending it rather than embracing it and letting it destroy you. So,
yeah, anyway. I think that Crowley was I think he was brilliant. I think he was very intelligent. I think he was very talented, but all the same, I really do think had he been born maybe 100 years later, he would have been probably a rock star instead of a philosopher. I think he would have embraced that lifestyle more.
Well, you're nicer to Crowley than I am. I think we look at this guy as being a genius when really he just took a bunch of pre-existing occult ideas and ended up popularizing them. But unfortunately, just like I was talking about, he was an all press is good press. He put the needs of himself, his desire to be famous above above furthering any kind of occult agenda. So the Christians wanted this guy to, they wanted to say, hey, the occult is bad, stay away from it. And he was a sociopath. So you could prop him up and say, look at this guy. He was a fucking asshole who treated everyone like shit. He was a perfect target. And I think you still see the influence on that today. And I don't know. He was an alcoholic heroin addict for the last 20 years of his life. He was calling him a genius when he was rich and he blew all his money on bullshit. We're still talking to this day because he was a media whore, essentially, and he didn't care that the press he was getting was bad press. And, none of his books really sold in his days. And so I think we have this tendency after the fact to look at him and say, oh, he was this genius, where really, if you talk to him today, he'd be an alcoholic heroin addict, and what he would have to say would be like, because that's what alcoholic heroin addicts say. It's.
I agree. I mainly agree with you. I mainly only give him that credit because of the voluminous works is, and also I would say some of his translations were pretty good.
I will say I've read all this stuff. He apparently does have some stuff out there that's good. I just know that I've read more than I should because the stuff that I've read hasn't been good. And I'm like, I'm only reading this because he's supposedly important. And I'm like, what is this shit? But anyways.
I will say this. When I was younger, much younger, and I discovered Crowley, the one thing that really revealed everything to me, the kind of aha moment for me of like, oh, okay, I get it. You probably don't know everything you were talking about, was his take on Chinese religion. Once I read that, because at that point, before that, I had a lot of fascination and interest in Taoism and the I Ching at that point, and he was completely off, and he spoke with this tone of certainty.
Yeah, well, he was an egomaniac, and I do think I will give him credit. It's real. He was a good scholar of the occult. He knows way more. That guy read way more about occult shit than I ever have, and ever will. I'll say that guy read a lot of weird books about weird esoteric spiritual practices. It's hard for me to even say he really tried more things than I have, because I've tried before. I've tried like chaos magic and astral projection and ritualistically using psychedelic drugs, and I've now tried dream kind of magic journaling over the internet, which is something that's entirely new. But he's experimented with a bunch of stuff. But what's weird is I think spirituality changes you, and Gary Lockman made that point about Crowley. But I think it's interesting that he's tied to the hippie movement, because I think part of what was wrong with Crowley is he started off using like hash and psychedelic drugs, And then he just got way more into fucking cocaine and heroin and alcohol. And that's where he went off the rails, sort of exactly like the hippies in a way. So it's weird that he became this hippie icon because in the way it starts off with some premise and then it goes from being these productive drugs to being heroin and, and yeah, I mean, it's, and, he thought he could beat these drugs. So yeah, also in tune with rock stars. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of history of rock stars and being complete drug addict fuck up. So yes, I think Crowley very well could have been a Kurt Cobain-esque figure who.
Oh yeah, I definitely think. I think the last thing I will say is the one thing that does always get swept under the rug about Crowley though is his massive misogyny and his massive racism. He was a complete misogynist. I mean, to him, women were really nothing. And that.
It's beyond misogyny. This is why I want to point this out, and it's interesting because there's the hippie version of Crowley that's, he said love under will, he was a good guy. And, I guess Leary and Wilson are responsible for this to a large extent. And I had that. Even after I'd started practicing the occult, I had this glamorized view. And then you look more into his life and you're like, wait a minute. This guy is this exact opposite of any kind of hippie ethos. I mean, he was an asshole on purpose because he wanted to be in line with Satan. And even though the occult isn't Satan worship, Crowley sort of was a Satan worshiper. Crowley did want to be evil. And when you talk about his misogyny, it goes beyond misogyny. In fact, the guy was a flat-out woman beater. Like, flat-out, like, he beat the fuck out of all of his girlfriends, beat the fuck out of them, and psychologically tortured them as well. So yeah, I mean, it's me, how the peace love hippie movement is like embracing this dude who's like beating the crap out of all of his lovers, and the opposite of peace and love. He was all about, and again, it's I'd be the one to point out the more you do alcohol and heroin, it's going to turn you into a worse and worse person. I drank for years. Alcohol isn't like bad if you're using it. I was never an alcoholic, and it led to some weird things. But heroin, I mean, yeah, if you're drinking a bottle of whiskey, and this guy for the final 20, 25 years of his life was drinking a bottle of whiskey and shooting heroin every fucking day. So that's going to make you into a fucking even worse of a person. And yeah, I mean, when you look at like what happened to most of his wives and girlfriends, it's just awful. They ended up in mental institutions, or and I think one of them killed them. It's just awful. He was just a total fucker. But people need to recognize that when they go around and start talking about, he was this insane person. It's just like he was, racist, misogynist, spoiled rich kid, like epic woman beater, irresponsible guy who probably got some people killed just by being an irresponsible fuck, so.
Probably. Oh yeah.
I can talk about Crowley. It's funny. Crowley is great because I actually I'll give him credit for art from afar. Like there's a couple biographies of Crowley that you'll read, and it's entertaining in this absolutely horror show type of way. So in a way, he did live this life that was like art. It's just art that just like, I don't know, Al Jorgensen has a great book about being a heroin addict, and it's the same thing. It's a great book, and it's all about all this horrible stuff, but it's like he makes a point of saying like, this was all awful. It's a horror show type of vibe. So yeah, Crowley is like that, and it's I find it, and especially from a magical perspective, because I think what you see with Crowley is he's regarded as a magical genius, and when you look at it, it's like what he did didn't work. The guy lost all his money. His books weren't popular. He died. If you're saying the only point of his work was to be posthumously famous, then yes, it worked. But in any other measure, it didn't. And just him being an asshole devoid of any karma blew up in his face over and over again. And when you read about his life, it's just fascinating to see. It's like, this guy just thought he could get away with anything, and it's just like, and he didn't. It all came back at him. Like everything that he did came back at him over and over and over again. And that's, a lesson in magic. That's what happens when you embrace self-destruction. That's what happens when you curse people and do shit do just petty shit like that. It's like, it's going to blow up in your face. And so rather than saying Crowley was some master, maybe you should like look at his life and be like, he's sort of an example of like, what not to do with magic. That's
right. Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing positive you can say about that is he had a lot of sex.
Yes.
That's about it. That's about it.
He had sex with really unattractive people too. So I mean, again, like really unattractive prostitutes. And and this is like I said, I could read about the guy for years because it's fucking nuts. Like the guy was a fucking absolute Looney Tune. Yeah, when he got into sex magic, he was going to try and find like the ugliest, cheapest prostitutes that he could find, and that's like when he got in sex magic, like that's what he was doing. It was like, let me go find the cheapest prostitute on the street. And, it's. Again, what a fuck! If you were friends with this guy, you'd be like, "Oh my god, I'm never hanging out with that guy ever again. Fuck him." But after the fact, people, are like, "Oh my god, he was awesome." And again, I could listen. I think I love Wilson. I'm glad that Wilson picked up on magic from Crowley. I'm glad that somebody, at least Crowley, somehow inspired Wilson to start tackling magic, and I'm very glad that somehow happened. happen. Because
I love Robert Anton Wilson. I have to say that. I think he's kind of the James Joyce of metaphysics.
Yeah.
He's a voice of reason. I love that about him. All right, so let's do our 5 rounds with Synthrock. So we're just going to go and lightning round 5 questions. So let's start it off. Speaking of Crowley, what martial art or finishing move would you use to defeat a young, virile, and mountain climbing Aleister Crowley?
That's a tough one. I think I would some kind of a super like spinny elbow type thing, like jump in the air and some kind of like rotate around and like elbow to the back of his neck. And I'd like to think I could kick his ass too, because I grew up like lifting weights and they didn't even have that shit back then. So like I think I got some more bulk on the dude. Like I mean that was like before weights, so I think I could.
Lanky. That was about it.
What's that?
I said he was wiry back then. That
was climbing mountains ain't easy, but again, technology. I grew up lifting weights, and if you're saying like if you're going like a virile young mountain climbing Crowley, that wasn't even when he was in his like 20s too, and like that's like back when he used to play basketball and shit. So it's like I think I could take it.
If you give him a tie clinch, I don't think he'd be able to get out. I don't think he would.
Sure.
All right. So is your music more suited for making? Now this is not really proposing a dichotomy per se, or a duality. But is your music more suited for making love or animal fucking?
I would say more for making love. And I actually saw that question. My more commentary on that is, I'm not like one of those people that says like, I love listening to my music, and like when I make it, obviously, I make the kind of music that I want to hear. So I'm not like one of those people like, I never listen to music. But I am weird in that I've never had sex listening to my own music. Like for me, like, and I have sex listening to music all the time, and yet, there's something too weird about like having sex and like listening to my own music. There's something too weird and egomaniacal about that. But I would say making love, Black Science, or I've done some more metally stuff. So some parts of Chapel Supremesus, I'd say more making love, but there's a good on that Chapel Supremesus album, which is like a 38-minute album, which is the soundtrack to this film. There's like 4 minutes of metal, and like it's so necessary to it. So I guess that part would be some more animalistic fucking, but the rest would be making love, I guess. But yeah. No, I draw the line at fucking to my own music. I can't do it. I'm like, it's too much.
No, I couldn't do that either. I'll tell you someone I think who would and probably does. Steven Seagal. I would say that he probably does that.
What does he play? He plays like the saxophone or something?
Yeah, he does like blues or something. He does some kind of blues. He dresses up like a llama and plays blues on stage. And of course, I'm not shitting you at all. This is all absolutely true. I really do suspect though that he probably does have sex with his own music.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. You know what? I bet there are musicians out there that did. Like I said, I'm not saying it's weird if you do. Like I'm saying, and in fact, I've always sort of thought that was like a little weird about me. And it's like, yeah, there's just something there that's like, that's too weird. But hey, I think some people might. Why not? That's hell, you make a bunch of dance beats. You take some E. Why not throw in your own dance beats? Like I don't know.
I think as someone who's with someone or someone who's single, there's both weird situations if that happen. I wouldn't want my kid to be like 20 or 30 and being like, my dad used to put on his own albums and have sex.
Yeah, and on that topic too, it is weird because I did like think about that. I definitely Black Science, my other band. I mean, there was definitely a metal influence on, but it was way more psych rock, and it was trying to be more a reflection of my personality, which more upbeat. I was in a band before that was like metal, kind of angry metal. Very, weirdly enough, I think like people that like the Disinfo would probably like it because I don't know, sort of like refused of Bad Religion or great. It was me, and I didn't play any instruments, and I was just ranting and about yelling about what's the spiritual ignorance of mankind, essentially. That's what I was thinking about. But, and when I was in that phase, I listened to a lot of metal, and it's a funny story about that. I'll never forget, like, you start thinking that it's like women don't really want to listen to metal when they're having sex with you, and these thoughts go through your head. And so I'll never forget, like, one time, I was dating this one girl, and we were just like, we did, I was like, and I used to think that it's like, oh man, when I was in a metal band and hanging around a lot of metal a lot, I was like, I'm gonna like meet some girl that I can have sex with and listen to metal, And then I actually did it a few times. I was with the girl, it was really cool with it. And I'll never forget putting on Wolf Eyes of all things, not metal, but like just corn, screamy Wolf Eyes. I think the song like "Burn Your House Down," and like we were fucking to that for a while, and then out of nowhere, I was just like, we just stopped. I'm like, this is just this isn't right. Like, I thought it would be like some fun, cool thing to do, and it wasn't. It was like, it was weird and creepy, and I was like, yeah, metal, you know, it's like, it has its time and its place, but I don't think it's really the greatest sex music in the world.
No, I don't know about that either. I couldn't do that. So what is the most Thad McKraken thing you can do right now?
What's that?
What's the most Thad McKraken thing you can do?
I guess, oh man, just trying some weird spiritual stuff. Yeah, I recommend these, trying just different things that, I don't think enough of us really play around with, even basic stuff like lucid dreaming and whatnot. And so I just recommend anything, at Thad McKraken, it's like I have all these crazy stories about weird experiences and, extra dimensional forms of intelligence showing up in my room and whatnot. And, I think I probably have an aptitude for this kind of thing. I think, just like everything else in the world, that, some people are good at certain things and, it's like some people are really good at math, whatever. I think I definitely have an aptitude for kind of like psi shit or magic or sorcery or whatever you want to call it. But, I also always say, I did in fact try a lot of weird things like astral projection and chaos magic. And I've literally done psychedelic rituals where rather than just like, taking psychedelics and going out and, going to a show or partying with your friends or going for a long walk in the woods, like I've set up like, the point to this ritual is to do this, and I'm going to plan it out and, gonna, do it by myself essentially and just set out a whole ritual. And I recommend trying that as well. So the most Thad McKraken thing that you could do, I think, would be to just try some weird thing. The whole point isn't, it's not even recreation. It's not, the point is to fuck with your own head and have some kind of a weird spiritual experience. And there's lots of different techniques that I'd happily recommend, because there's a part of me that's like, you fucking try it, I get tired of sounding like I'm crazy, it's like, you try it. Like again, it's like none of the stuff that I tried was really stuff that I didn't, I was all suggested by other people in books that I've read. So,
No, I understand. My whole life I've been somewhat of a natural born psychonaut. And really wanted to go and travel in my own space, in my own head, and experiment in many ways I can. I have to say that it's life-changing, at least you can say that. I can say that.
Indeed.
So
Indeed. That'd be a warning. I said, if you do experiment with this sort of stuff, though, don't be surprised if all of a sudden you realize that you can't go back. Sometimes you can't unsee some things, and yeah, I can definitely say that astral projection in particular and psychedelics, it's like I saw something that I then couldn't unsee, and now I'm talking to you on shows like this and whatnot.
Okay, so would you say something in E prime?
Oh shit, man! I got to be honest. That's like, how does that work again? Like, I'm forgetting. I know I'm a Wilson fan, but I haven't reread. So, like, how does E prime work again?
Just say something without the case and term to be is.
Oh, okay. So this is like maybe logic stuff,
right?
Okay, so psychedelic music appears from my perspective as the most important kind of music currently. Is that good?
Beautiful.
I tried more like, I actually tried the maybe logic stuff, and I really tried more. I love his theory, and I like, rather than saying, I think it goes too far. I think what Wilson describes with maybe logic is like, that's sort of impossible, especially in our society. But I do think that the more you try, and rather than saying things definitively, and the more you throw perspective into things, like, this isn't this way, but this is the way it appears to me. From my perspective, I think there's something incredibly profound and pointing out. That's what I love about Wilson in general. He talks about the concept of reality tunnels. I talk about microverses. I kind of use like slightly different terms, or kind of intersubjective microverse is a term I like to use. But I think it's very important that we try and think about things in the subjective, literal sense, and it's very important to say, from my perspective, it's this way, or it seems this way from another.
I absolutely agree. I think the person who probably spent their whole life really trying to make that a reality, even in crossing crossing the line into the sciences as well, would probably be Marshall Rosenberg, who created the nonviolent communication. I guess the method of communication. He was a big moderator. I think he died this year, actually, but he was actually a protege of Carl Rogers, the psychologist. Oh. And I think a lot of what he was saying is actually very much Robert Anton Wilson's type of stuff, which is, of course, Kaczynski's general semantics and da-da-da-da-da-da. So here we go. We just go back in time to 1984 with, that's one option.
Okay.
Eat psychoactive mushrooms with, that's two options, or collaborate with. And we have A, Robert Anton Wilson, B, Grant Morrison, and C, Morrissey.
Morrissey, okay. So, and I have to match the questions with is that the protocol here? I'm trying to say which would I want to do which with.
Exactly.
Go back to 1985 with, I would say. Okay. So there's go back to 1985. There's eat mushrooms, and what was the third one?
Collaborate with.
Collaborate with. Okay. Yeah, it's actually pretty easy. I would want to go back to 1985 with Morrissey because he was probably getting tons of chicks back then, and I could probably just hang out and latch on. Truth, I didn't actually know that much about Morrissey. Like, I'm aware of him. I know the Smiths. I know some of his songs, but like I know he's very vegan. But so he's like the person. Yes, I'd go back to 85. That's when he was biggest. I guess I'd hang out. I can't say I'm really that huge of a Morrissey fan or know that much about him. I don't dislike him in any way. It's just, there's a lot of musicians. So eat mushrooms with, I'd probably go Robert Anton Wilson. Just because, he's a hippie legend. Why not? That would be interesting. We'd see if we could, that was mescaline where I saw Mescalero. See if we could accept, should have thrown like a hot girl for the doing mushrooms with, because that's right. But then, no, I'm just kidding. I'm married. And then I probably want to collaborate with Grant Morrison. It'd be I would like to see Grant Morrison, and of course, this is what I would like. And I have a book out, by the way, if you're watching this, called The Galactic Dialogue: Occult Initiations, which is all about how I ended up getting summoned into the occult. And that book is me talking about my magical experiences and how I got summoned into it, and just kind of a direct account. And Grant has never really done that. And he has The Invisibles, which I think is one of the most brilliant pieces of literature that I've ever read.
I have to agree with you on that one. I absolutely have to agree with you on that one.
Graphic novel. But what I would like to see, and he starts talking about it, he started a new book called Super Gods, where he starts talking about there's one chapter, it's all about comic books, but there's one chapter that's about his magic and his spiritual stuff, and he says, maybe someday I'm going to write a book just about that. And in my mind, Super Gods is great. I love comic books. I'm not nearly on the nerd level as him, so some of it was a lot of like, okay, superheroes, and then there's more superheroes, and I got a little bored, but that chapter was brilliant. And so I'd like to see, if I was going to collaborate with Grant, it'd be me sitting down with him and just like trying to coax out to him actually kind of like, rather than fictionalizing some of his magic, just to like straight up like, here's a bunch of shit I did and here's what happened. I'd like to, because weirdly enough, that's what I do, and I partially do it because Grant didn't do that, and Wilson started doing that with Cosmic Trigger, but he abandoned it. So I kind of took up the torch to say, like, what if I just say straight up, I started doing magic and this is how weird it got. I think most of us are too subconscious. So that's a project that I would like to work on with Grant, is just being like, I think there's a lot of people like myself that are really curious to just have you write just about magic, no superheroes, no nothing, just talk about some of this time when you were doing The Invisibles, talk about some of these experiences that led you to writing these things. And I think it would be good.
Yeah, for the audience, you're referring to the otherworldly contact that Grant Morrison experienced in Kathmandu on a cannabis-induced trance.
Yes, in a cannabis-induced trance, yes. And it's funny because when I have experiences all the time, but I do have my one contact experience. And while being completely different in me happening in my room and me showing up in my room, the message that was shown to me was very similar. And it was about the whole beings existing out of time and time looking like a singular object. Of course, when it was communicated to me, it was communicated in terms of the Holy Trinity, and it was shown that there's this part of me that exists outside of time, which you call the Father or Mother, and then there is me, who's talking to you right now, that's the sun in the equation or daughter, and then there's the entire time stream in general, which looked like a developing star or planet, but it was the same message. When you look at Grant's communication, it's a very similar type of thing. Like, what you're communicating with is this thing that exists outside of time. And then you go back and read Wilson and say Cosmic Trigger, and that's what he says, is that I'd forgotten completely when this happened that he talks about how that's the common thing is they show up and start teaching you this message about the nature of time. I just read a bunch of Grant Morrison, like Justice League, and I read his Action Comics, and it's like, it's amazing in his stuff. It's still all coming down to that. Like the last Action Comics I read was this, it was about, fighting a fifth dimensional invasion. And it's just, again, it's all about time being warped and all time happening at different perspectives. And so it's worked its way into basically most of the things he's done. I just read another thing by Grant Morrison, Zenith, same deal. It's all about the occult and like the Nazis and the occult connection through superhero contacts. And it's, about these, again, summoning these entities who exist in a capacity that's impossible for us to comprehend because they're on the other side of the veil of time. Anyways. So yes, for your readers, go read some Grant Morrison. He's one of the biggest selling, if you've never read him, he's one of the biggest selling comic book artists of all time. And the fact that The Invisibles is my favorite thing about him, but the fact that he's managed to get some of these absolutely bizarre ideas into superhero comics and that then kids are reading and that's warping their mind, genius. It's like, what else are you going to do?
I go on record saying that the Wachowski brothers stole from Invisibles for the Matrix.
Yeah. Well, you don't know whose story to believe, but Grant's story on that is apparently that, he knew people that, because, he's friends with people in Hollywood, and apparently, they were handing out Invisibles comics on the set, and it's not like the entire theme, people that have read the Invisibles read that, you'd have to look at the art. And it really is like the art design and stuff, like the Men in Black, some of the the robot creatures and stuff like that. It's directly from the Invisibles, and Grant was just pissed that they didn't ask him, and obviously he wasn't rich at that point too, so he was obviously a little pissed that they were making a lot of money. But he apparently buried a hatchet, and my point is they should have since he wasn't that rich, why didn't they just, rather than handing out these books, why didn't they just call him and be like, dude, why don't you help us write some of this stuff? That's what blows my mind. It's like he obviously would have done it for not that expensive. So and then the sequels wouldn't have sucked. If you would have called Grant in and been like, hey, help me out with this, there would have been a good Matrix trilogy rather than a bunch of suck. But I didn't like the sequels. Have you watched Sense8 yet? That's apparently getting good reviews. I've been leery about the Wachowski brothers ever since the Invisible sequels, or the Matrix sequels. And now I'm like, they might rope me in with Sense8. It's getting good reviews, so maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah, they pretty much, though, single-handedly ruined any chance of there being an Invisibles movie. That's the one foul that they did.
I wonder with Grant, I saw the All-Star Superman movie, which was based on his stuff, which was condensed. He didn't write the screenplay. I do, in fact, wonder if Grant's stuff is so dense that it would be hard to translate to the screen, because it is weird that it hasn't really happened yet. And when you watch that All-Star Superman, it's kind of a short movie, but it does actually make me wonder if, as great of a writer as he is, if it just doesn't, it's just so dense that it just doesn't really translate. It's written for comics. It's not really written for film. So yeah, I wonder that. I don't know if you could really turn the Invisibles into a great animated show. If I ever had a dream project, if I ever for some reason was in Hollywood and they're like, you can do whatever the fuck you want, or if I was rich and had a shit ton of money that I could spend on making something that would possibly lose money, that's what I do. You'd have to do it, I think, animated, but that would be dream project, trying to actually bring the Invisibles to the screen.
I heard from, I read an interview with Grant Morrison recently that said that he is thinking about making a video game, though, like a huge open world video game with the Invisibles. So, that might be pretty cool. I don't know.
That would be cool.
Thad McKraken, it's been a pleasure. We've had an amazing conversation. I can't wait to put this on the show. I can't wait for everyone to see this. Is there any plugs you want to make?
As I said, my book is out, The Galactic Dialogue, Occult Initiations. You can buy it on Amazon. It's really $2.99 download if you want to check it out. If you want to hear about things like me talking to extra-dimensional forms of intelligence, there's even some band stuff in there. It's the story of how I got in the occult, and at that time I was playing in my more punk metal-y project, and it's some stories about how that broke up. So yeah, some hilarious kind of Spinal Tap stories. So yeah, it's really good. Check it out. I am DMI TV on YouTube. Definitely check that out if you want to see me just ranting about spiritual stuff for extended periods. You can do that. Also, Chapel Supremesus, the two films, which are split up into one film, are both on there too. So log on over to there and check it out.
And we can also read your articles in Disinfo.
Disinfo.com, yeah. And if you're if you are ever bored, and you can go to disinfo.com and search Thad McKraken, and like a gajillion things will come up, and that could entertain you if you like my stuff for ages. So
one thing I had to say,
yeah, disinfo.com. If you just want to search my name, tons of stuff will come up.
Your book, by the way, I have to say one last thing, is beautiful looking, actually. Beautiful glossy cover, beautiful 90s-esque cover, too. I like it.
I actually did. That is an image I did myself. Yeah, so I'm also a visual artist. I didn't really mention that. Stuff that's behind me right now is actually my work. So.
Awesome, awesome. Is there anywhere, are you selling it anywhere?
I am not selling my visual art right now, but I really need to get on that. Yeah, you're making a very valid point. This is an area I should be doing limited print runs of some of these things. Yeah, I actually just got a studio. It's a really weird story. So my wife and I were looking to buy a townhouse. We ended up finding this place that, like, the first floor is essentially like an art gallery. It used to be a hair salon. So you can see some of it behind me. I'm just kind of building my own studio. But yes, I imagine after that's up and running, I am going to actually start trying to hawk more art here. So yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, this is something. It's in the works. It's in the works. Give it like another year, and it'll be ready to go.
Awesome. It's been a great interview, and
yeah, great talking to you, man.
Whenever you get another musical project, we'll be hearing from you soon again from that, and hope to talk to you soon again.
Yeah, man. Good. It was great, and thanks for asking me, and thanks for having me on.